information or working knowledge of them. I've tried a few just a little bit. So I think there's kind of a little bit of an array of different things that we want to think about when we're making a yeast, when we're picking a yeast. Boy, am I going to have a hard time with this all night? We each have different abilities to control our temperatures. Quite frankly, if I didn't have the ability to control my temps, right off the bat, that throws away a handful of yeasts.
D47
most notably
on the list.
Yes, that's exactly right. Its window of comfort is very small, and I hear a lot of people getting started and trying on their own to get that yeast going, and they don't realize that I like to keep that particular strain at about 62 degrees. I think if you go much more over 64 or 66 for sure, then it starts to get kind of grumpy, and you go over 68 and you'll just wish that you never even bothered with it. So I think that's really important. And I have a controlled fermenter now that I can press in the electronics and it'll hold it right at a given temperature, but I've only had that for a little bit. So I always had to ferment in trash can. I'm sorry?
Aren't they awesome, though? Having decent fridges with actual temperature control, and if there's one thing, if anyone's going to make their own fridge, if there's one thing I can recommend you do is actually remove the thermostat from the fridge, because that's going to limit how cold it will let the fridge get. And then if you put your external thermostat directly on the bottle and control the motor directly, it's going to give you a much better result and much better response times and cold crashing, so you don't lose too much. What do you mean? Drop too many points of gravity while you're trying to cold crash.
There you go. Good advice. So I think it's important to look at temperatures just to make sure that you can keep the particular strain that you want to make at the time of season in your house. Obviously, in winter, you can make things in the winter that you can't in the summer. And there's actually a lot of yeast that probably don't do so well in the summer. And I'm talking about temperatures more than D47. But anyway, get on this particular Scott's Laboratories Handbook, 2016, and you can look at all the different parameters that any strain that you would be interested in using. And so the things we need to consider would be the temperature. We need to look at bricks. And we'll go back and touch on this in just a minute, because that's important. People are confused about, well, is this a sweet mead yeast or is this a dry yeast? Because they don't understand what makes it dry or sweet, they're confused. And so we're going to talk about that in a minute. But also in the Laboratories Handbook, you can look at the YAN needs of each of your yeast. Some yeast don't need to eat very much, and some need to eat more than others. And in the Laboratory Handbooks, it will tell you that. It will also tell you about a kill factor. Some yeasts are very combative, and they can create an enzyme, and this enzyme will basically purge their environment, the biomass, so that they're the only ones that can survive in there. Although there are some yeasts that are neutral, meaning they're not affected by the kill factor. And then some are sissies and they'll just roll over and die, right away. And you go, well, so what does that mean to me? I think some meads that we might make, especially if you're crushing your own juice from grapes or you're using fresh fruit, when you're putting that in your fermenters, they're probably carrying along with them a lot of wild yeasts and other bad guys that are going to maybe contribute to the flavor. Well, in fact, they will contribute to the flavor, but if you want to make sure that they don't stand much of a chance, then you want to pick a yeast with the kill factor, and they'll kill all the bad guys, at some point almost right away. And then lastly, we want to look at the ABV tolerance. How much alcohol will this particular yeast be able to create if I treat him right and he has a good 2 weeks? that's kind of important, and that goes back to we were talking about the bricks in a sweet mead versus a dry mead yeast. Every yeast is able to reach a certain alcohol level before they stop producing alcohol. This probably will rub some people wrong, but I swear to God it's true, and I haven't had time to find it in any science journals. But hear me out here. People think that when we get to the ABV tolerance level and the yeast stops making alcohol, they think that they died of alcohol poisoning.
No.
No, they're just drunk.
Tell us why. Chevette, tell us why it's not true.
Yeah, what they've done is essentially what Hamish just said. They've gotten drunk and fallen asleep. As soon as you either thin it out or correct the pH or whatever, there's the or even just warm it up. Sometimes there's the possibility that it can start right up again. They're not dead. They're just sleeping.
Thank you very much. People want to argue with me on that on the internet all the time. I have some friends that have had stuff re-ferment 3.5 years after it went dormant.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I've heard of that happening is as you have your mead age, the pH is one of the things that's going to change and settle as the tannins break down a little bit and the acids peter out a little bit. You're going to get a pH change, which is then going to make a more habitable environment for the yeast, and there's a chance that they'll pick up and take off on their own.
That's a good point.
AJ, what's the longest that you've had a mead that was dormant that decided for whatever reason to get back up and go to work?
I've never really had one that's gone that long. Anything that's been gone later than a year, if I wanted it to start back up again, I had to inoculate it again. Most of the time, if I've left it in the carboy and it's at its maximum alcohol tolerance, I pretty much assume it's good to go, and I haven't had anything go funny in the bottle since then. Mm-hmm. Even though, you know, if it's been in the carboy for over a year, I don't tend to stabilize it before I bottle it, and so far so good.
No.
Which is probably not the best way of doing it, but I also always keep a control. I always at least bottle 1 or 2 bottles in a screw top bottle, and if anything's going to go, it'll be those ones first, because they're always the ones with the dregs in it. So I sort of always have it controlled, so I can sort of, you know, crack the seal, and if it goes tss, then I know I need to go and empty the entire batch back into a carboy.
I see. I actually had my first ever bottle bombs just here in the recent past. My lady friend sold her house and moved, and so I had quite a bit of stuff over there, and trying to get all of my stuff out of there on her time frame that she needed for the other people to move in and whatnot. I was forced to bottle up a bunch of stuff, which I did, and I took them over to my brother's place to put them in the basement for storage because I'm overflowing at the gills where I live with the stuff. And I went back there a couple of weeks ago to get some things because I wanted to check some stuff to determine what I wanted to enter into the Orpheus cup. And as soon as I walked downstairs, I'm like, oh no, and there was some stain on the floor. And of course, the only case that I've ever had blow up was on the top of about 6 other cases, so it was 6 high, and it poured through all that stuff all the way down to the floor. And I, you don't know my brother, everything's got to be just absolutely perfectly clean, like a show house. And so I had to go tell him, and I was bummed that I made a little bit of a mess, but more than that, I was bummed out that I just made this wonderful mead, and I forgot to stabilize it. And so I thought it was stabilized, was the only one that I missed somehow, and it blew up on me, and I lost almost 3 gallons of nice cranberry Christmas mead that I had. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. We need to get back on schedule here. So I wanted to help our leader. I'm sorry?
You're such a slave driver.
Hey, someone's got to be terrible.
I know, right?
Well, no, I'm just trying to be conscious to not get off on too many rabbit tracks as we go along.
Hey, don't pick on the rabbits now. We got rabbits on this show.
Yeah, right. Exactly. My bad.
Right now.
Yeah. So for you listeners that don't know the difference between a sweet mead and a dry mead, almost any wine yeast that I know of will take you for sure to 14%, and generally I think most of them will take you to 16% ABV. Especially today when we use the modern science, I know that some of the charts in this handbook that I want you guys to get intimately familiar with will say that it stops at 14%. These are just approximations, and what I've found since we've started what I call supermanning the crap out of our mead, out of our yeast, we've made them so strong and so able to resist the stress and all the tension and stuff that used to cause them to kind of poop out early. I'm just seeing them consistently every day rolling right on past their tolerance levels that are listed in the charts, and I expect maybe at some point in time they might upgrade that. But anyway, you can't count on that for one, because every biomass is its own self, and it's different than the last one, and be different the next time you make something. So we can't exactly expect it to stop when it reaches 14% or 16 or 18, like it says. So then what makes a sweet mead? Well, you can have a sweet mead at 6% alcohol, and you could have a sweet mead at, I was going to say 60%. You could have a sweet mead with 25% alcohol in it. The reason that it's sweet is that there's more leftover sugar, we call that residual sugars, in the must than what the yeast were able to metabolize. And so,
for the record, pushing a yeast to 25% is not a great idea.
Well, no,
I say that 18% would be the heaviest.
Well, except I've had EC and DV10 both go to 20 without pushing them. But you're right. I was just trying to serve a point that you can have an incredibly high ABV and still have a mead that's sweet because you have more sugar in there than what the yeast were able to consume, and so they leave that behind, and that's what makes a sweet mead. Now, the converse of that is if you have a X amount of sugar points in your must and the yeast can eat all those sugar points up, they eat it to dry.
Well, it's not like they can read the label. They don't know when they're supposed to stop.
Absolutely. I don't know that they know anything, but they sure seem to know how to. They know how to live, don't they? They go crazy.
That's it.
Yeah. So, and then I see a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is the wrong approach, but too many people want to try to figure out, okay, if I need a mead, if I have if I have a yeast that's going to eat 14% alcohol, or I'm looking at my hydrometer now, and that's about 1104. So they figure, okay, I'm going to add 1104. The yeast are going to eat that many points up, and they're going to stop. And so then if I add 1114, I'm going to have 10 points of gravity left over in my must. And then they're also, it seems as though for some reason those same people, yeah, those same people are also seem. I'm sorry?
Some people do brew that way, even some of the professionals. But the thing is, it's because they've repeated the same batch with the same ingredients and the same yeast in the same situation over and over again that they know when the yeast is going to stop based on that situation.
Right. And even then, I don't know if you could guess. I would say if you can guess within 6 points, that would amaze me. That'd be pretty amazing. And I'm sure some can. So I'm not putting that method down. I'm just saying that's too hard for me. It's too much brain damage. It's too much guesstimating. And I also don't really care too much. I have a tendency, and I'm starting to change just a little bit, but I've always liked higher alcohol meads. I'm a big guy, and I drink a little every day because I've always got so many different things going on that I have to taste them and test them to see where we're at and what we need to do. And I almost don't even get a buzz drinking mead anymore because my body's gotten resistant to it. But anyway, I used to like higher ABVs, and I've kind of lower ABVs will age and come good sooner. And so you may like a 12% or you may like an 18%. That's fine. Here's what I would suggest so that you don't have to guess where will your yeast stop. and how much extra honey should I leave in there.